Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Champaka is delighted to welcome Gita Ramaswamy, author of Land Guns, Caste Woman, and Shruti Viswanathan from the Equals Project to this conversation. It's Constitution Month at Champaka, and I would just like to introduce the speakers to you. Gita Ramaswamy is best known for her work with the Hyderabad Book Trust. Has published over 400 titles since 1980. She was earlier associated with the Marxist Leninist movement in Telangana, going underground during the emergency in 1975 with her husband, Cyril Reddy. She taught English in a Dalit basti in Ghaziabad near Delhi. Starting in 1984, she worked for a decade with the Dalits of Ibrahimpatnam and helped them in their fight against bonded labor and landlessness. Gita has authored several books and has translated extensively from Telugu to English. Welcome, Gita. So lovely to have you here. Shruti Viswanathan is the founder of the Equals Project, an initiative that explores constitutional history and nation building. Shruti is a graduate of the National Law School of India, and we are happy to have you as well. Just to introduce Champaka to you, if you're new to the space, Champaka is an indie bookstore based in Bangalore. We have a children's library, we have curated collections, and a cafe. We are both in Bangalore and in Goa. You're free to take any books you like, sit, and we don't disturb you at all. So it's that kind of a space. And yeah, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Nayanika, for that introduction. I'm very excited about the conversation today. So, we'll largely be discussing Gita's wonderful book, Land, Guns, Caste, Woman. This is the copy up here. It's okay if you haven't read the book. We're going to be discussing a lot of themes from the book, but more generally about constitution and peaceful revolution here. But we're also, towards the end of this conversation, going to talk about something that I think everyone will enjoy, which is books, and talk a little bit about Gita's revolutionary work with the Hyderabad Book Trust. Hello and welcome, Geeta. Land Guns. I'm going to give a brief introduction about the book before we jump into some of our questions and some of the themes that I would like to discuss with Geeta today. So, Land Guns Class Woman is the story of Geeta's extraordinary journey, beginning with revolution at home, challenging patriarchal and casteist norms within her home household, her journey with the leftist movement, especially during emergency, her disillusionment thereon, and what happens after dissolution. So Gita's dissolution, pretty early on in the book, that's a spoiler, I'm going to give you right there. In the first one third of the book, you find out that Gita's dissolution, but she's not without hope. And Gita starts an extraordinary journey living with agricultural laborers in Ibrahimpatnam and how together they enact a revolution, one without guns, one without violence, but one which is successful ultimately. I want to begin by reading a couple of paragraphs from Gita's book. Usually, I want to use that to set the tone for the rest of the conversation today, where we'll be discussing Gita's experience, revolution within a constitutional framework, and much, much more. So I'm going to start. This is on chapter 12 of Gita's book. The chapter is called The Son Who Bled on the Fields of Karamchendu. On 16th July, a Khamma youth, Kottini Shrinu, washed his buffalo near the steps of the water tank that Dalits used for drinking, dirtying the water. Sorry about that. Okay. A Dalit youth, Kapti Chandraya, standing nearby, upbraided Poti Shrinu, who reacted by beating him with his cattle whip. A Dalit woman, Suvartu, who came to fetch the water, saw the incident and asked Shrinu, "Why are you beating him?" Infuriated at this, Poti Shrinu aimed his cattle whip at her. She raised her water pot to resist the blow. This simple act of resistance led to the Kammas uniting to attack the Madiga colony from all sides, destroying their property, chasing them into the fields to attack them with sticks, axes, and spears. The Dalits fled en masse to the nearest town, Chirala, which was 8 kilometers away, where they took refuge in a church and were fed by the local Dalits. The Karamchedu people were in the vast church compound. Some stayed with their relatives close by. Men had been killed. Apologies, my earphones are falling off. But men had been killed, one of them brutally, by twisting a spear into his groin. Women had been raped, and scores of people had been brutally beaten up. Groups of people were sitting about quietly, sometimes talking, sometimes still. There was wailing from some groups. I knew of left solidarity, but that was a kind of cultivated solidarity. This Dalit solidarity stemmed from the accident of birth. For the first time, I had an inkling of what Ambedkar's mission had created among the Dalits. It's a truncated part of this really important story in Gita's book. But Gita, as I read this book and I was reading of another incident from 1990 where there's the installation of an Ambedkar statue with the idea that the installation of this statue sort of shows that it's the era of Dalits and Bahujans which has come and the era of the landlords is over. And yet, cynically, as I read these paragraphs, I think this could happen today. I could read all of this in a newspaper report today. So, what do you think has really changed in terms of caste relations, in terms of social justice, since your work in the 90s, if anything at all?
Yeah, it's like this change happens in increments. The
Gita, I
increments are
think you're
sometimes
on mute.
oh no, no. I'm. Can you hear me? I'm not on mute. I'm not on mute.
Uh, okay, yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yes, I think change happens in increments. Sometimes increments are huge, sometimes increments are small. But there's been a lot of change from 1980s when I started work to now. Um, Now, an incident like Karam Chedu is not possible in coastal Andhra where it happened. Yes, that kind of massacre of a large number of people will not take place because Dalits are now watchful, Dalits are stronger, they are more aware, and Kammas also know that there is possibility of backlash, that they can't just ride roughshod over Dalits as they used to earlier. I think in most of India, except in the remote parts where the state has no reach or has less reach, this kind of atrocity is now less and less. You find very subtler forms of discrimination, subtler forms of exploitation, and in that sense, the large picture which I mm, showed in my book in the 1980s is no longer there in most parts of Telangana. You can't put a stone on the back of a bonded laborer who hasn't paid his debt back, and you can't force him to pay his debt back. You can't do things like that. You can't rape a woman. You can't bring a woman from the Dalit community into the Dora's house and use her how you want. That's just not possible now. And to some extent, democracy has made inroads into people. Now, to what extent and in the kind of electoral system, what does it represent? That's an issue. But people are now far more aware of their rights than they were 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and far more willing to question and ask, demand their rights.
Okay. And I guess one question I have is if we were, I mean, I think, and I agree with you, your answer is pretty clear that we have made inroads into achieving more caste justice, into more social justice. But I mean, it's not enough. Uh, what do you see as the forces that can either propel or regress the caste justice or the limited justice that we have won so far in terms of caste in society?
What can propel if there is a um, of course, Dalits have to be united. That's the basic issue. And the splits on the categorization issue, which is happening in very many states, these will, I mean, if it is not resolved in time, and if those who have made more of reservation and employment than they have, do not concede to the demands of those who are less favored, then it will be a problem. That's the first issue. The second issue is that other sections, the left, the liberals, have to join hands with the Dalits to make a broader coalition. The Muslims too. I mean, Muslims organize on their issue, but how far have Muslims come together with Dalits on Dalit issues? So there has to be a larger mobilization um, to support the Dalits. What can push the issue backwards is difficult to say because India is changing so rapidly. And the kind of change that we've seen over the last decade is like, I mean, it's like nothing we've seen before. It's like nothing even emerged through emergency with which we went through is nothing compared to this. So one can't really say if a broad coalition is likely to emerge which will support the marginalized sections. The constitution itself may be overthrown.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to the constitution in just a second. And I'd like to discuss what that means and whether it's good or bad. But I want to stay on the question of caste justice for just a second and talk about this issue that's come up quite a lot, which is the caste survey, which has come up, which has gained a lot of political momentum in the past month or so, I would say. And whether you see that as a form of redressing caste justice. And speaking to some of the divides that you mentioned just now in terms of Dalits or that.
No, I think the caste survey was long overdue. It's a good thing to know because we have caste mobilization. Whether you like it or not, we have a large area where caste mobilization is going on. So a caste survey will help us to pinpoint what are the actual, because we've never done this since I think a very long time before, and this will help the particular castes also to mobilize themselves in the constitutional framework.
And there's a question in the chat that someone has asked. When you mention these broad coalitions within Dalits, within lefts and liberals, on what lines do you think such broad coalition can be formed?
Mm. See, we have a big issue in India about any kind of coalition framework or working together with people. We have a huge problem in working within movements because we do not respect boundaries. We do not respect the other organizations' aims and objectives, and we always try to sideline the other organization and emerge as the one leading the coalition. So, if these kind of politics are going to play out, is very difficult. What we see in Hyderabad, for instance, is that because of the loss of faith in coalitions and coalition networks, when you have 15 organizations supporting or protesting against something, you have exactly 15 people there, each one with their banner. The large numbers of people don't come because they've lost faith in coalitions and group work. And now, who do you lay the fault with? Certainly with the left, because they've practiced divisional sectarian politics all through. Certainly with the feminists, because they've done the same thing, and certainly with the Dalits too. So unless we learn how we are to live and work together, it's going to be difficult.
I'm going to come back to the Constitution now, which you already mentioned in your answer. Um, and I mean, we work in constitutional history, right? And one of the things that strikes out when we discuss the Constituent Assembly is how there was so much dissent with the Constitution that we find came out with. I think in popular imagination, uh, and I mean, to some extent, it's true that everybody was happy with the Constitution that we wrote, but obviously there was a lot of dissent. There were a lot of people who felt their views were not represented. And I want to read out a quote from someone, Sardar Hukam Singh, who was in the Constituent Assembly and who actually refused to sign the Constitution. And a quote that he had, a criticism of the Constitution. And he says, the Constitution doesn't give anything substantial or concrete to the individual. It only gives solemn promises and pious platitudes. The fundamental rights are worthless. There are so many restrictions, and they are left at the mercy of the legislature. The right to work is not guaranteed. There's no assurance for old age maintenance or provision during sickness or loss of capacity. Even free primary education has not been provided for. The minorities have been ignored and completely neglected. The provincial units have been reduced to municipal boards. And I mean, he goes on, but he ends with saying, all of this shall consequently facilitate the development of an administration into a faster state, for which there is enough provision in our constitution. May we be saved from such contingencies. And this criticism that Sardar Hukum Singh comes up with is one that's quite common across the assembly, that the constitution is not transformative when it comes to economic rights. It guarantees political rights for everyone, and it puts together a framework for governance and for the judiciary and administration. But in terms of the structures it leaves behind, there's nothing transformative on a social or economic front, and that the same structures of privilege will continue. And some would argue that has been sort of belied by the journey of independent India since. I think in your work, you have looked at achieving economic and social justice within the constitutional framework. So, what is your response to the criticism of someone like Sardar Hukam Singh?
The directive principles are not enforceable. Directive principles do speak of economic justice, do speak of economic equality. And Ambedkar was very clear that without economic equality, there could be no social or political equality. Now, the government, it is when the directive principles, the way they are framed, it is incumbent on the government to implement them. I can't go to court and force the government to implement them, but it is incumbent on the government to implement them. That's what the Constitution says. Now, I think now whether the Constitution is transformative enough, the problem is not so much with the Constitution as with the framework of democracy we have here. As long as democracy, even if it is not economic democracy, is not practiced from the grassroots above, it has taken a long time for people to really get the vote. In 80s, elections were rigged. I know absolutely. Now, in my time, elections were rigged. You couldn't even vote. And you had to vote as the Dora told you to vote. Even now, women vote. I mean, many of them women vote as their men tell them to vote. The communities vote as the caste elder tells them to vote. And money plays a big part. I mean, whoever is going to give more money is going to get more votes, without a doubt. So this kind of electoral democracy and the framework that we have now is not conducive to transformation the way it is now. Now, whether we say it's the constitution is at fault, I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough to comment about that. And I don't know if the constitution was transformative enough, whether it would be implemented at all. My thinking in the 80s was because I was discovering new laws in favor of the poor. And I was so surprised that there are so many laws, but the implementation is like so terrible. So it seemed to me when people asked for new legislation, I would always argue, why do you want a new legislation when the existing legislations are not implemented? The rules are not framed for the legislations which have been enacted. So it seems to me that um, strengthening the pillars of democracy in all fashions, in the court, in the legislature, outside in electoral politics, all these are very important. Without engaging in all this, we cannot point fingers at the constitution. Not That's not to say that its constitution has to remain unchanged or anything like that, but I'm saying it's even if you have a transformative constitution, very little is going to percolate down to an actual change in the situation given the framework we have now.
And I mean, this really speaks to, I think, Ambedkar's point on constitutional morality, right? Where he says that constitutions are not constitutions of right, they're constitutions of might. And unless constitutional values seep to the common citizenry and they are motivated by them, that injustice of any sort is felt by the common citizenry, and it's not just something that's relegated to courts and academics and lawyers, we won't truly feel the effect of this constitution. It's in its working, and its working can't just be left to governments and the courts. It's we as citizens who must work on it. And I think
Yeah,
so much of your work, which you describe in the book, also speaks to that constitutional morality. Like, how do you work with people in government, in mass movements to bring about that constitutional morality? I'm curious, Geeta, if you have found certain approaches more successful than others in discussing what we say are constitutional values, right? Equity, justice, and ensuring that it's not just a word on a piece of paper that we learn in our civics class, but is actually something that we are motivated by on a day-to-day basis.
I think personal engagement. Personal engagement is what is important. We don't connect to people. We don't connect to our legislators. We don't talk to them. We don't talk to the mandal. I mean, we have mandals in Andhra and Telangana. You have tehsils. We don't go and engage with the government officers. We don't engage with the lawyers. We don't engage with police at all, right? When we don't engage personally, how do we expect change to come? And for me, I think my biggest advantage was my personal engagement. Nobody expected a young woman to come. I mean, I went everywhere. I went to judges' houses. I went to the collector's house. I mean, without shame, I sort of barged into everybody's house because you couldn't get into the offices. And I explained what I had to explain, and nowhere did I get a bad reception. Nowhere. So it seems to me that personal engagement, one-to-one engagement, explaining the issue is so very helpful because the the function, the things which are there, the legislators meet with the community representatives, or they meet with contractors, they meet with people who finance them. They don't often meet with the poor people except during elections when they ask for votes. The officials who sit, it's right from the collector or down below, also don't see, they see people as supplicants who come saying, please sign this, I need that. In the courts, the representation of the poor is absolutely minimal because everything is framed in a certain language of rights. If you do not fit into that language of rights, you cannot engage with the court process. So how do these people also get to understand what are the demands of the poor and how these need to be? And I think their personal engagement makes a lot of difference. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself. I was saying, there's a line in the book where you say the process may be legal, but it can neither said to be just nor is it in consonance with the spirit of our constitution. The dissonance between law, justice, and the constitution is clear in this situation, right? Um, so you said there are lots of laws, right? So what are people's options when laws don't promote justice, or when the enactment of the law doesn't promote justice? So what do people do then?
People have to rebel. I mean, there's no other way. People have to rebel. People have to take the present moment into their hands. They have to weigh their options. They have to see which is the best strategy forward. What are our tactics? Who to make friends with? Who is the person with whom we should not negotiate? Draw the boundaries. And I think there's no other way. People have to take the moment into their hands. People and leaders have to take the moment in their hands. And then change is possible.
Is there an example, Gita, that you want to sort of talk about where that was successful, where you know
Okay. Now,
that
in any land issue, the law says that whoever is registered in the land records, he is the one who can legally till the land. Now, whether he got his land record by fraud or coercion, the law doesn't go into, but he can till the land. There is another very commonsensical truth, that is 99% of ownership is possession. But this is very important. if you are possessing that land at that moment, the law will work in your favor. So then, what we did was, we didn't just file petitions with the collector saying he got his patta by fraud and it's not it's not legal, etc. We encourage people to till the land immediately. Now, when people tilled the land, the balance of law and order was tilted. Police, arrested all of us for trespass, criminal trespass, destruction of crops, and all the other provisions of the CRPC. So there was a breach of public law and order. But in a very crucial sense, when people took over possession of the land, when they tilled the land and they reaped the harvest, there was a change in the power relations in the village. People realized we can do this, and the landlords realized that they cannot carry with their whatever they did all those years. They could not do what they did all those years. So the shift in power relations, and then there's a very peculiar, though most of the CRPC, most of our Indian criminal procedure codes deal with violation of property rights. Okay, so many of them are to do with violation of property rights. So the poor are really hemmed in by these things. But there's also this funny thing called Section 144. When two people are disputing something, the government says, stay. Whoever is in possession shall remain. So whenever we till the land, there was a disturbance, there was public breach of public law and order. And then the RDO had to pass the Section 144 saying the status quo holds. And who was the status quo? We were the status quo. So you see, actually, those laws worked in our favor, right? So it's I think a lot to do with laws to find these loopholes where the poor can actually benefit. That's very important.
And then somebody mentioned that they couldn't hear me clearly. I've removed my mic. Please let me know if this makes the audio better.
Yes.
So then what I take away, Geeta, from your answer and from the book also, is that this actually requires a coalition with lawyers, with people who are able to negotiate, who are educated and who are able to negotiate with the law and with the administrative systems uh, in a way that maybe somebody who doesn't have as much knowledge of the law and who is, from less privileged circumstances might not be able to. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes, certainly. We've always had young, educated people from the middle class who left their comfortable lives and worked, whether in the freedom movement, whether in the Naxalite movement, whether, even now in Jagdalpur, there are 5 women lawyers who are working with the Adivasis. So there have always been people like that. And that's where I think the poor by themselves, because they don't have the resources, and any struggle, gets exhausted. I mean, no struggle is like you can't fight for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. People get exhausted because they have daily lives to live, they have children to raise, they have medical issues to address, they have the day to day, roti, kapda, makan to address. So when people get exhausted, you have to have support from outside in terms of middle class people who can raise help in the legislature, in the courts, in the administration, with finances if necessary. This kind of thing is important.
And do you see a difference in that engagement by middle class urban youth in the past, I would say 10, 15 years? Do you see a shift? Is there more? Is that less? Is it more or less the same as when you saw it in the 80s and the 90s?
Yeah, no, 70s, 60s upwards, there were lots of middle class people who said we want to lead different lives. Okay, there were thousands of people. Um, Now a lot of middle class people want to go into save the snake, save the bird, save the dogs, save the cats, but not work with human beings anymore. I find that a little depressing. I mean, it's fine, you say save the snakes, you save the planet, but what's going on today outside, what's happening in democracy, what's happening in politics is something which is so important. And many others want to write books. Many young people want to write books. When we were young, okay, I mean, writing, you wrote for the college magazine or for the local newspaper, but writing books was not something that you did easily. Writing a book was a big thing. Even a newspaper to get printed was a big thing. But now, lots of young things getting printed all over. Right, the craft is beautiful, very well crafted. You have all these creative writing workshops and courses in the US and elsewhere, which tell you how to write. But what is the content of writing if there is no public engagement with people? And what can a person do to change the world through writing? I mean, I think that's next to impossible. Writing is only an adjunct to work, to engagement. It cannot by itself, I mean, any piece of writing that has changed the world has come with the French Revolution or with the Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution. They will not come, out of the sky just like that and change people's minds. So I think active engagement in the field is something very important. That's what young people need to do.
Hmm. I mean, I want to sort of take this point and move something that I saw mentioned in an interview about the book, and I think that sort of speaks to this point of engagement, which is you said that we rarely talk about love in social movements or love and empathy in social movements. We talk about violence, we talk about agitation, protest, rebellion. Um, but somehow love is always about the interpersonal, right? But you made a point that love is really important in social movements and how we think about them. And it really struck me. I do believe love and empathy is crucial to bringing about social change. So I want to ask you, Geeta, if you want to talk a little bit more about that and how you've experienced love in social movements through your work.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't have a great experience in the Naxalite movement. Parts of it were good with the younger people because we really loved each other. We would die for each other. That's a big form of love. All of us who are young. But with the older people, it was like just there was no love. There was no empathy. As long as you listen to me, you're fine. If you don't listen to me, out. And so I find this in every organization that as long as you listen to me, you're fine. If you don't listen to me, I don't love you anymore. So love is conditional. In the feminist movement, love is conditional. If you don't listen to me, no, so every group has its, what do you say, the walls that you build, the invisible walls that you build around yourself. And there are invisible rules, which if you violate, then no love. So I say what I learned in the Ibrahimpatnam movement was unconditional love. And it's not as if the people and I didn't clash on many occasions because I'm not an easy person to work with. And I'd say off with his head, beat him up and things like that, which they didn't want to do anything at all. But the kind of patience they had in dealing with someone like me, it can only come out of unconditional love. So if people as a mass can give you unconditional love, and we were an organization, remember, we were a trade union, we were the Ibrahimpatnam Taluka Agricultural Laborers Union. So there was a definite structure, there were office bearers, and if we could practice love among ourselves and break our heads for, I mean, we'd sit sometimes with an issue for days on end, nights, because people worked in the day, but people insisted on a consensus. Everywhere the issue was consensus. If there was one person who dissented, we'd sit one more night till that person. We came along, we got into a framework where everybody broadly agreed. Yes, so there was, I'm not saying that it's a thing, but the kind of work which went into um, in among the members and in getting a group to make some decision was immense, was really immense. Whereas here, in the groups that I see, you say something, out, you're outed. You ask for something, you're outed, which is like, I mean, if we are working with people and if we are the people with who want to get out of our comfort zones and work with people, we should be leading with such ideas of love and empathy. We should be working with the people who dissent with us in the organization. You know, for instance, in the group which I worked in, that is the PDSU and POW, there are 5 PDSUs now, 4 POWs, and all with the same manifesto up to the comma and the full stop. Now tell me, why do you need such organizations um, if there wasn't love in that group? So, I mean, the love is a very difficult word because for us it seems, not feminine. It seems girlish, to love people. But at the root of all our connectedness is love. If I do not love the people, if I do not love the world, I don't want to change it. Why? I can withdraw into my room and I can be by myself. But it's because you love, you engage with people. So love and empathy, and love is not enough because love has to be followed up with a lot of hard work in practicing that love. So that's what I think we don't do. It's a very sad thing that what the left, I don't know if it's the left that has set the trend, but the left, it seems to me, because the left is the oldest organizing group, the left sets the trend and everybody follows. Everybody splits, everybody says nasty things about each other. And, and the nasty things extend backwards. Even when you were together and you were fine, but you'll say, even at that time, she was like this. She said things even at that time. She was like this. So that's a very difficult situation when we do not want to understand and connect with other people. So I think any movement now, if it has to grow, it has to come to terms with this factor of that we have to love each other. And I think to some extent, the queer movement has done this, has brought this to the fore. Like no other group, the queer movement, or what I've seen of the movement, talks of love in a unashamed fashion. You should be unashamed about it.
No, I agree 100% with that. It does seem like we are more comfortable expressing or talking about emotions such as violence, hate, other types of emotions in public. But when it comes to love, we don't want to talk about it, even though, like you said, Gita, that it is crucial for any sort of social and personal change. In it defines any relationship that we have, like, not just personal but other types of relationships. So I think it is important that we talk about it more. We talk about its transformative power and become comfortable engaging with it. So I do think that comes across quite strongly in your book. I think even that an incident that you mentioned towards the end of the book, after you sort of withdrawn from active engagement with the movement, and some of the people that you work with come back many years later and give your daughter a pretty substantial sum of money, and you're like, I didn't do that for money, but it wasn't about money. It was about their love for you and your work that they wanted to represent through that, or at least that's what I took away from that incident. Um, I'm gonna talk a little bit about books now, but before we move there, I do want to encourage everyone to leave your comments or any questions you have in the chat. Geeta and I will sort of address them as we move along, but we will also have time for more directed questions at the end. But please do feel free to leave your questions in the chat. So, in this last section of our talk, Geeta, I want to talk about books. This conversation is hosted very kindly by Champaca Bookstore, and I think almost everybody here shares a love for books. And we spoke about the role of writing, right? And the fact that writing needs to be accompanied by work, that writing cannot be the work. It is maybe the consequence of work that one does. But I want to talk about, what do you think is the role of reading in revolution? Can reading be thought of as a revolutionary act by itself?
That's tough. No. I mean, reading is certainly subversive. Yes, I will agree there that it's subversive because it brings to you ideas which are not there in your immediate environment. But whether it can be revolutionary, I mean, I wouldn't agree about that. Subversive, to the extent that it's subversive reading. But Without reading, reflection is also very difficult. If you don't read, you don't reflect. A book teaches you to reflect, and it's important that each of us engage with issues in our own way. You can't, there's no leader who's going to tell us, this is the way and this is the path, do it. We each have to come to terms with what we can contribute, how we can work together. And for that, reading is important. But then the poor people have never read, right? The poor people, I mean, even now, I think, even though they're literate, they don't read books. They say, my God, books, they're newspapers, and that's about it that they would like to read. But there's such a premium on reading among poor people. If someone has actually read something, they speak with such great admiration. Among them, if there's a boy who has read a book, he's actually read this. So they know the value of the printed word without a doubt. But I think reading by itself, no, not revolutionary.
I mean, in the book, you also talk about your work with the Hyderabad Book Trust, right? And in setting up of the book trust, you talk about this idea that it's important to elevate the discussion within the left movement, within activists. And the Hyderabad Book Trust um, sets out with this mission of making these books more accessible and making the conversation more informed in some way. And the Hyderabad Book Trust, of course, looks at books in Telugu. And one thing that I've sort of been reflecting on in the past year, and as I read your book, was the loss of reading in local languages. Right? I'm Tamil speaking, that's my mother tongue. I can read and write Tamil, but I will say that it is very difficult. I can read 4 English books in the same time that I can read maybe one Tamil book with great difficulty. But as I've been like reading Tamil books, there's so much that we lose in the translation also, right? So what do you see as the loss, if any, as many of us, especially those of us growing up in urban India, lose the ability to think, to read, to engage with in local languages, and maybe then have a disconnect with some more local experiences?
Yeah, I think it's only a matter of communication. When you don't read in the local language, you don't have enough material to engage with them. Yeah. But that also depends on whether you're in the literary world or not. Now, if you don't read Tamil, you can absolutely work in Tamil Nadu with spoken Tamil. So it depends on what kind of work you chart for yourself. Is your work in the literary world, in those people who read and write Telugu, or is your work among common people who really don't read? So uh, I don't think that not being able to read in a local language is a great disadvantage. I'm Tamil too. I can just about read, but I mean, by the time I read a line, I could have read a page in English. So I've just given up on that. And I learned Telugu. I can read Telugu, but again, I could read 4 English books in the time I read a Telugu book. And it has never stopped me from engaging with the Telugu world. And to sometimes, if this is a disadvantage, no? I mean, there's someone like Balagopal, the civil rights, human rights activist, who wrote equally well in English and Telugu because he said when he wrote in Telugu, he would think in Telugu. When he wrote in English, he would think in English. So, which means that those of us who don't think in the Indian language are deprived of whatever those connections that are made in the brain. But it is possible to turn this to your advantage because you can then bring in whatever you have access to other languages to the language in which you're working. It's possible. I find that I don't read much in Telugu. Yeah, I mean I can translate with that ease, but because I don't read Telugu, when we have to review scripts, I have people, we have peer review. So you have people who review, then I have filters saying, okay, this person has come from the Dalit movement, this person from the left. So his or her responses are like that. So in a sense, I have a unbiased judgment of a Telugu script compared to someone who reads in Telugu and has biases. So you can convert the disadvantage into an advantage. It is possible. I'm not saying it's like necessary, but it is possible. and I don't think um, it's something to worry about that I've lost my. And even pretty soon in India, I think in about 50 to 60 years, everybody will be speaking in English.
I mean, the one thing that I do wonder in terms of reading more in English is that if we will lose diversity in stories and languages, like the people who will write more are then the sorts of stories that will be commissioned more are the ones that are written in English to some extent, and then the type of people or the types of experiences that inform that become more homogenous than stories that are written in other languages. I don't know. Do you think that's a valid fear? And if yes, what can we do about it?
No, but Indian languages are not going to die. There are people who love their language. There are people who are going to continue to write, irrespective of whether the books are going to sell or not. Those who have something to their experience to narrate will do so. So, in you're going to get a diversity in Indian. You continue to have the diversity in Indian language, and as long as we keep translation alive, not just into English but between Indian languages, I don't see it as a problem. I mean, India has always been a country of many languages, and we have lost a certain amount of multilingualism. I mean, like earlier people would know three Indian languages, but because of the linguistic states you have lost that multilingualism. But you can compensate that by translation. I mean, Perumal Murugan is going to write, our Telugu writers are going to write, people like Bashir are going to write in Malayalam. So you can't still their voices.
Mhm. There's a question in the chat, which I think Geeta speaks to an earlier point that you made, where someone asks, how can we raise political consciousness that also operates with agency?
You know, you have to break that question up because I don't really understand it. Can you do that?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
what,
Uh,
it's very academic, and I'm not sure if I understand it fully.
and the person in the chat can clarify if I am misunderstanding this if I've got this incorrectly. But I think what they're referring to is how people can read and have political engagement through reading, right? But that's a more passive form, I would say, of uh, what do you say, engaging with political consciousness. I think the person is asking, how do you combine that with agency? I don't know if that clarifies, Geeta, the question, or I can
Yeah,
also ask the person who's put it there
yeah, yeah,
to, if you
yeah.
can
Now,
explain it.
yeah, but I think that's an individual choice, and that's also a generational choice, in the sense that when large movements sweep the world, larger amounts of people are swept into participating with agency, like in the 60s and 70s. You had Black Panthers, you had the Women's Lib movement, you had the New Left, the Students Movement, you had Naxalbari. I mean, you had the Vietnam War. It was very difficult not to be part of those things if you were reading and conscious and wanted to do something. Now, if you see now, what are the kind of movements which are there? Global movements which are sort of uh, engaging very fiercely with the establishment. So it's both ways, I think, personal agency plus the times that we're living in. So the times also have to be um, conducive to agency. And I think, aspirational ambitions are far higher now. I mean, there are far more opportunities for young people. And so young people, when we were young, if you didn't do your MA, you wouldn't get a lecturer's job or whatever, but you could exist. It's not as if we couldn't live. But now people don't do their PhDs. It's not that they can't just live, but they want that. I mean, they want to be at the top of their profession. Everybody wants to be. People want to join the IAS. People want. There's these kind of aspirations which those don't go along with agency. Those just don't go along with agency. If you have to do a PhD abroad, if you have to do a postdoc abroad, if you have to do a PhD at all, then I think very difficult to work, because it's the years between 20 to 26 that are crucial in forming people's agency. That's when, you don't care about what your father is saying or what your family is saying or what friends are saying. You just want to do what you want to do. And if those years you miss out, na, that's something to do with age. After 26, it's difficult to, you get into a pattern which is difficult. So 25 to 26 is when people are pursuing their careers. And now I think careers are so important because people think, how am I going to live? I mean, well, if you want to live, you can live with, you can learn motor mechanics and you can live as a motor mechanic. You can, be an assistant in a bookshop. You don't have to own the bookshop. There are many ways of living, which, modest ways of living. What's wrong with that? Because happiness is not tied up with, getting a degree from MIT or Harvard or being collector of some, district. Happiness is tied up with liking what you do, liking what you do. And I think that is lost, liking what you do, doing what you like. You should do what you like, what you love. You should do what you love. That gives happiness, not so that I don't know. So 25, 20 to 26, I think, are the crucial years in which people lose out.
I mean, I think there is now this sense that even something that you like, I mean, doing something without the idea of being good at it or getting money out of it or having a career out of it is lost. Like everything is a, as people say, hustle, right? They want a side hustle, they want another thing. But I think the joy of doing something because you believe in it or it gives you joy in some way is lost. And we want to think about, oh, if I'm good at playing the violin, how can I be the best at playing the violin? Or how can I do something about it rather than I enjoy playing the violin and that's all I want to do with
Yes,
my life.
right, right.
Okay. I think if anybody has any final questions, then please do feel free to put that in the chat. Um, but Geeta, I did want to end this conversation asking you about what book you're reading right now. And if you have a recommendation to us and this audience about what book we should be reading, something that moved you and that you think we should be picking up, besides your own book, of course.
Yeah, I usually read 3 or 4 books at a time because
Okay.
some books you read as work, some books you read. I mean, I read a fiction, I read a non-fiction, then I read something which is like important to me personally. So right now I'm reading Charles Allen's Coromandel because
Mm-hmm.
I had saw a stray reference to it and I said, yes, I want to read that. And then I'm reading Larry Yang's, I don't know what's the title, Consciousness, Speaking Consciousness. He's a Chinese American queer organizer. But the book, which then Stories of the True by Jay Mohan, is something which I sort
Yeah.
of recommend to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But the book which has moved me really deeply in the last 6 months is When Things Break Up, when things are breaking up, or when things break up. That's by a Buddhist nun called Pema Chodron. And I was going through a tough time with some health issues. Things are falling apart, right? So I thought things are falling apart, and I was looking out for books, and I came across this amazing book, and it has helped me so much to deal with personal issues because personal issues, nowadays people say go and see a therapist. Now that's expensive, that's time consuming. So, and personal issues are on the rise for all of us because of the lack of connectedness and living in nuclear families. Many issues are. So, for me, this book, When Things Are Falling Apart, that's the name, was like a very important book, was like a revolutionary book in a sense. It brought home to me so many of the things fitted in place, and the things that didn't fit in place, it helped me to sort of deal with it and say, okay, some things you can do, some things you can't do, accept. So yeah, that's about the book. What would I recommend? No, I think no, I wouldn't recommend as such any book. except the stories of the true. I mean, because that's for a wide audience. The stories of the true is really for a wide audience. But otherwise, I think people have such different choices. We should read the books we want to read and which are important to us at that moment. A book is like comes to us at a moment, and it's a book is a it's a it's a departure of grace. Na? Books brings grace into your life, so that's so personal.
Um, I was going to end the conversation, but then someone has put in a question, so I do want to have the chance to just quickly address that question, Gita, before we move on. Someone's asked, will Rebel resolve issues while also addressing structural change of state power? I think they're talking about armed struggles which try to overthrow the state. Um, and if there is a way to resolve these issues while also addressing the need uh, to structurally change how state power operates, especially with respect to people.
It's I think now, as compared to some 50 years ago, we face a much stronger state. The state is well armed, not just in terms of arms and people and forces, in terms of technology. So if we are thinking of overthrowing the state, we have to think not just twice, we have to think, many times. And which is why it's important in the constitutional framework, which the left has never addressed. I think it's very important to address in many areas the niches of the constitution which provide for change activity to take place. I think that's an area which has not been explored, which Ambedkar also focused on a lot. And so, which means really means I think that armed struggle is not something which I envisage as getting to be successful at all. And it's also the very problematic question of violence. What has happened with the various armed movements that have taken place, then ended up in fratricide. You kill each other, you kill some innocent people, you blast a train in which only second class passengers travel. It's a very problematic question of violence.
Thank you, Geeta. Um, and thanks to everyone who showed up today, despite what I imagine is a very exciting World Cup final happening at the same time. So thank you for your time. I'd like to invite Nayanika back uh, to quickly wrap up this conversation.
Hi, am I
Dayanika,
visible?
no, your camera is off.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for both of you for being here and for that lovely conversation. Thank you, Geeta. I think I speak for everyone when I say the clarity of thought you bring to any issue we gain from continuously. And Shruti for being such a lovely moderator. If you want to buy Geeta's book, it's available on our store. You can we ship all over India, so you can order. If you're in Bangalore, come by, say hi to us. We would love to have a chat with you. Thank you everyone for joining us. We will see you in our next online installation. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.